Welcome to Galesburg, Illinois. Galesburg, Illinois is mainly on Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy track. However, there is some Santa Fe tracks that run through town. Where we're currently at is the Ottawa sub, something like that, and the Mendota sub. A little bit farther up is the Barstow sub. And the former Santa Fe track is the Chillicothe sub. The train before us here is a Galesburg yard job with a Santa Fe Warbonnet. Warbonnet here is number 673. I find this one kind of interesting because it has high ditch lights and the nose is almost completely covered with red paint. I don't know if it's just faded or if it was covered with red paint, but you can still see a little bit of Santa Fe markings on it. To give y'all a little bit of a rundown on Galesburg and what we've seen. This is only part one. In part two, we'll be seeing other trains and other places. One interesting thing about BNSF, especially in Illinois, is the cars that are on it, which are quite interesting. As you just saw, there was a Burlington Northern Hopper, which are getting rarer and rarer these days. One interesting on this train is the FE Trading gondola that's just off screen there. I find that kind of interesting. After this yard job stops, he'd roll back slightly and then start reversing back into the yard.
Be waiting for the Amtrak.
I must say, as 673 is backing in, the smoke show that comes out of it is kind of cool and kind of sad at the same time. It's most likely these engines will be ran like that until they can't be ran no more and eventually put in a deadline and eventually scrapped. It's still nice that we are able to see these engines though. I must say 673 is probably the most interesting of the yard jobs. Or one of the most interesting of the yard engines. Because, well, it has the high ditch lights. I believe this is the only one that works this yard with high ditch lights. Here we see an Amtrak train. I'm not exactly sure what this one was. I believe this was the Southwest Chief. Or it could be the California Zephyr. I don't remember exactly. Leading today is a pair of P-42s. I must say, 147, or that trailing unit, must have been involved in some sort of wreck, because the nose does not look good. After this Amtrak clears, we would see a coal train. One interesting thing about this coal train is that this is the one that runs to Monroe, Michigan via Elkhart that we've seen sometimes. Today it's being led by a pair of SD-70 Aces. I decided not to show the entire train, which is going to happen on most trains. Over 3 hours long. After that coal train was cleared, we would have a slight break before we would see another Amtrak. I believe this is the California Zephyr, led again by a pair of P-42s. While that Amtrak was stopped, there was a Warbonnet SD-60M Triclops and an SD-40 that were slowly rolling out. The Warbonnet has a low ditch light, which I find pretty interesting. I personally like the low ditch lights better. I just think it looks cooler. If I remember correctly, the Santa Fe Dash 9s were the last engines on BNSF to be fitted with low ditch lights. And I believe they're some of the only ones remaining. After a little bit of sitting, waiting for the conductor to, I assume, flip the switch for the Y, they would soon reverse back. would begin to get ready to leave. Shortly after Amtrak cleared, we would see that Dash 9, SD60M, and SD40 something go by on the other side of the Y. I'm not exactly sure what they were doing, but I assume they're getting ready to build up a local or something. After those cleared, we decided to go over to the yard. We'd see some sort of auto rack train parked, or auto rack manifest. This first coal train here is actually the ones that runs on the Grand Rapids sub. They're stopped here for either recrew or repower. There's also another coal train parked here, along with some manifests that are sitting and other cars. As we're getting closer to the engine shops, we would see an absolute rainbow of power. We see H1 through H3 and H4, a couple Warbonnets, a few BN engines, and a few other interesting things. We'd go back to the station for another Amtrak, this one being the Carl Sandburg. Leading today is an ST44 Charger. Carl Sandburg is a Midwest service, similar to the Pure Marquette that runs on the GR sub, or the Wolverine, and the Blue Water, that run as well as Michigan. This one comes out of Chicago, and it heads to... He was heading to Chicago. The way he's going now is Chicago, and the other way, which we see the other two Amtraks, is west. After stopping at the station for about 5 minutes, he'd end up leaving.
Stopping? The last one that went this way, he didn't knock on his way out.
After the Amtrak's Carl Sandburg cleared, we would see another Amtrak. This Amtrak being the Amtrak number 4, I believe, the return trip of the Southwest Chief, with Amtrak 201 leading. .201, for anybody wondering, is the Amtrak Operation Lifesaver unit. I honestly think it's a quite interesting paint scheme, yellow and black. One interesting thing about this train is the second two engines and the first few cars were from the very first Aero train being delivered out west. That Metroliner, the car behind it, which is a Viewliner, and the very next car after that, which I believe is a part of the Amtrak Heritage Series. So that's pretty interesting. Basically, those are just being brought back to Chicago to catch another train out. This train was actually running very late. I believe it was running around 6 hours, 7 hours late, which is rather late. I'm pretty sure we've seen this train other times in the video where it was around 10 or something that we should get here, so. After Amtrak cleared, it'd be a little bit of a wait before we'd get our next train. This train being a grain train. This grain train had a BNSF ET44 C4 liter, an ES44, and a pretty interesting engine trailing third out. The engine trailing third out is a AC44, however it's a Devo body. It's mainly referred to as a pre-production Devo. $57.47 is the AC44 G-Boat, basically. For anybody who doesn't know, BNSF has 127 AC44 CWs. I believe they're numbered 5,600 to about 5726, I believe. Which means everything above that in the 5700 series would be a pre-production Devo. I believe most of them are in H2, along with most majority of the AC44s. There is one that's in H3 though, which I don't believe you would see. Coming out of the yard would be another yard job. I believe this was 673 again. Might be wrong. One interesting thing about the grain train, however, is actually towards the back, which we'll get to here a little bit later. This is one of BNSF's 150-ish heritage hoppers. This one's celebrating Spokane, Portland, and Seattle. Unfortunately, that would be the only one we would see this trip. I hope to see some more someday. After that train cleared, we would get one of the most interesting things we've seen this trip so far. And this is just the first day. Here we see NS 1068, the Erie Heritage Unit, leading a coal train. This is the counterpart to that empty 880 that we seen earlier. This one also runs through Elkhart, and I believe did the day after. The old SC-70 Ace was chugging real hard. Another cool thing about it is it had an NS-9 trailing. Get your shots of these while you can, because those are getting harder and harder to see by the day. While this coal train was still going over, we'd end up being pretty critical. However, since we were stuck at the crossing, we ended up catching the end of the train. We'd come back the next day to see a Gevo and 2-9s. We couldn't even get to the station before we saw this train. We were at the crossing just outside. I must say, the old -9s have seen better days. Thankfully, BNSF doesn't have any plans to rebuild more of these things into the AC-44 C4Ms. I didn't record much of that train, didn't really have anything too interesting, but we'd see yet another empty coal train from the Monroe, Michigan power plant, /880, with yet another pair of SC-70 Aces leading. On this train we had a couple of BNSF hoppers. What I call the billboard. A little bit farther back, we would have a PN hopper, via the coal hopper, which we've seen before on GRC. After that came by, we would see another Amtrak. I believe this was the Southwest Chief. It's either that or the California Zephyr, I don't know. But today it was being led by a Phase 7 P-42. I've seen Phase 7 a few times. And once before this on a P-42. Anyway, here comes 167 leading the Amtrak. I forget what this one was. After the Amtrak cleared, we decided to break off because it was really hot outside. I'm pretty sure the feel like was 100 at least, but oh well. We'd come back a little bit later to a rainstorm. Or, well, it started raining. The very first thing we would see is this big consist of, I believe, 5 or 6 BNSF engines. All of these were basically ES44s with one ace in the mix. While that was happening, there was another train pulling out of the yard. I believe this one crossed over a couple times to get into a different yard lead. And now there's another one coming out of a different yard lead again. And there's also one going to start coming into the yard. Here in a few minutes, it'll start raining pretty hard. After that train cleared, it wouldn't be a long wait before we would start hearing GE rumbles, and a ES44 and a C44-9W would come out of the Galesburg yard. You can also see there in the back there is another train moving or stopped. That just shows you how busy Galesburg is. It's truly incredible how many trains go through here in a day. While I was going by, I decided to do a little bit of taking pictures with my phone here. While this train was slowly going by, I believe the sunset would get pretty cool looking. You can see there's a BNSF engine. For anybody wondering, I'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting engine. After this train clears, it'd be a little bit of a wait before we get our very next train. Here we see another Carl Sandburg. Another name for this train is the Illinois Zephyr. Today being led by another SC-44 Charger. Reason I didn't record it, but we would see another green train here. It was led by ES-44 trio, 2 up front, 1 in the rear. Try slipping out of the station here, but get caught by this train again and a signal. So as soon as this train cleared, we would turn around and head back. 44. Here comes the other train with that signal. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be a train that we wouldn't have seen before. It just ended up to be the lead engine from that one train earlier, 8334, reversing back into the yard. I don't know why. After that cleared, we would come back and we would see a yard job backing in. This had a few Burlington Northern hoppers on it. It also had, toward the front end, it had a big car with some coils. Or cables, I guess. I don't know. It wouldn't be a Galesburg yard job if it didn't have a Warbonnet. And, well, it did. With an absolutely huge break, I decided to go over to the Chillicothe side to see some Southern Transcon action. Here we see a quartet of ES44s pulling an intermodal. After that train cleared, we would break off and we would come back to see this. Sitting at the station, we see 3 ES44s idling with a grain train. I believe this was an empty grain. Must say though, it did have some pretty interesting graffiti, especially on that front car there. That knife looks kind of cool. After the grain train would get moving, not move very fast, and then stop again. On the very end of the train, we would see a Burlington Northern hopper. I personally like the Burlington Northern. That must be one of my top 3 favorite fallen flags. Speaking of Burlington Northern, the very next train would have an interesting trailing unit on it. Coming up, we would see a BNSF ES-44 and an SD-70 Mac in executive Grinstein paint. This is one of the very, very early Burlington Northern SD-70 Macs. This one being number 9407. This is, I believe, one of the earliest SD-70 Mac numbers on BNSF I've seen. Well, Grinstein. One interesting thing about this Mac is that it had the H1 wagon wheel on it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a picture of it. This would be another one of those coal trains that well card recording. After this coal train cleared, we would get a manifest. This manifest had some pretty cool stuff on it. Leading this train, we have a ES-44 C4 with some really weird weathering done, and another ES-44 or whatever. Now, this one had pretty cool, interesting old rolling stock on it. Some of the more interesting cars on this train were farther back. A couple old ATSF hoppers and a set of well cars loaded. As the end of the train got closer, I noticed that there was a DPU in the form of a BNSF BS-44. After that DPU cleared, it'd be a little bit more of a wait before we'd get our very next train. This train has 4 engines, and the very last engine is the one of interest. It's a BNSF fake bonnet. I'm pretty sure it is. Fake bonnet, The reason why many rail fans call BNSF fake bonnets or BNSF Warbonnets that paint scheme is because these are originally supposed to be Santa Fe engines. However, the BN and Santa Fe merger had an order of Dash 9s for the Santa Fe, and they ended up just repainting them into the Santa Fe's Warbonnet paint scheme, but said BNSF on the side. Same with some SD70 Max. Keeping up with the heritage theme on this train, we get a few Burlington Northern hoppers. only do we get these hoppers, we also get a cut of interesting gondolas from BNSF. One of them being BN, one of them being yellow, which I'm not exactly sure what railroad that is, and an interesting new BNSF hopper, or gondola. The end of this train in sight. It wouldn't be a long wait before we would then see the next train. Sticking with the theme of Santa Fe paint job, we get a Santa Fe Warbonnet coming out of the yard. The reason why this one's considered a Santa Fe Warbonnet is because this was originally made for the Santa Fe Railroad and is still in Santa Fe colors. .692 has to be one of the more pristine Warbonnets on the Galesburg hump yard job. It's almost completely untouched and BNSified. The only thing that's really wrong with it is, of course, the air conditioning box. But that's not a huge chunk. Like most Galesburg yard jobs, they would slowly roll out of the yard, stop, and reverse. After this long string of auto racks, we then get a string of coil cars, and one of them is this mostly pristine BN. I've never seen a BN coil car before, let alone one with both of its shields being original BN ones on a BN flat. Another interesting thing is those FE trading gondola. With a yard job still going, Amtrak would be fast approaching. If I remember correctly, this is, I believe, the Southwest Chief. I'm not sure about that though. After this, we would go and break off to the yard. In the yard, you can see there's an H1, which I believe is the same one, still there. A few H2s, a couple Aces, a former Santa Fe Warbonnet with a BNSF H2 paint. And that's basically about it that we can see. Here's a couple more angles. You can also see a Santa Fe Warbonnet there. I'm not sure if that's a -9 or a B40-8. Anyways, as you guys can see, this is the end of the video. To leave us off, we have an H2-9 and an H3 ET44. This is not the last part of the Galesburg. There's actually 2 more parts of the out west trip. But anyway, this is mainly Galesburg stuff. The other half is other places which are interesting. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. And yeah.